Welcome to Manna-Fest, hosted by international evangelist, teacher, and author Perry Stone. On today's program, you will experience a powerful right now word that will change your life forever. Enjoy unique insight into prophetic and practical truth as Perry ministers using biblical word studies, ancient Jewish history, and Hebrew customs that will cause the scriptures to come alive as never before. It's time to feast on fresh manna, so get ready to be blessed and encouraged. And now, here is your host and teacher, Perry Stone.
I'm now standing at the lowest spot on earth, the edge of the Dead Sea, which is directly behind me. The Dead Sea is located right off of the edge of the Judean wilderness on the side of Israel. Behind me are the famous rugged Judean mountains, and this is the area where Christ was tempted of the devil. The actual location is believed to be several miles up the road near the area of Jericho. The Bible said that in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. I was reading Matthew chapter 12:43 one day in Israel, and I was very intrigued by this. It talks about when the unclean spirit's gone out of a man, he walks through dry places seeking rest and finding none. And my guide, Gideon Shore, I asked him to read that from his Hebrew Bible, and it was interesting because according to the Hebrew Bible of the New Testament, the dry places would be the same region of the Judean wilderness. In other words, in the area where Jesus was tempted of the devil, it is the same area indicated where unclean spirits walk through dry places seeking rest and finding none. That's interesting, but let me show you something even more interesting than that, the Dead Sea itself. The Dead Sea and its history is linked to fire. For example, let me give you some information about the Dead Sea. Did you know, for example, the Dead Sea is 1,369 feet below sea level, the lowest spot on earth. At the bottom of the sea, in other words, if you start where the sea level actually is the level of the water, you can go down another 2,300 feet total below sea level if you reach the bottom of the sea at the bottom of the water in the middle of the sea. It is the closest to the underground chambers on land. Now let me explain what I'm saying. These chambers that we've been discussing that are underneath the earth, when you are at the lowest spot on earth, you are closest to those underground chambers here than anywhere on the entire earth. And that is as far as land is concerned, as far as people can see. Now if you're in the ocean, and you have in the ocean it's maybe 10,000, 20,000 feet deep, that's a different story. But on earth, where people are walking, this is the lowest place on earth, which means that the Dead Sea area is the lowest area to those underground chambers on the face of the earth. Another point that I'd like to bring out is this, that the Dead Sea area is linked to fire. Now, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah in the ancient time, the Old Testament, was located at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Actually, there were 5 cities called the 5 cities of the plain. They were Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. Now, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, according to the Bible, took place with fire, destroying those cities, and the Bible describes it as fire and brimstone coming from God out of heaven. Again, that happened in this part of the world. In fact, it happened right here where I'm standing at the southern part of the Dead Sea, which is in this direction. The Dead Sea, again, is linked to fires. As a matter of fact, the Dead Sea, according to a quote, was formed by earthquakes and a boiling outburst of fire and hot water impregnated with sulfur and brimstones. This whole area through here at one time had a lot of volcanic activity taking place. As a matter of fact, in the country of Jordan, which is located in this direction, you can't see it today because of the haze. Normally, you could see the mountains. But in the country of Jordan in this direction, there are entire valleys and entire tops of mountains that are covered with black stone. As a matter of fact, we just passed a few miles in front of us here, an area in Israel which is covered with black stones, identifying from a geological perspective how that these stones were burnt by heat. These stones were burnt by fire. And I believe when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, it's very possible it was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Why do we believe that? Well, because geologists who are from Israel have examined this part of the Dead Sea and have come to the conclusion that years ago there was a lot of volcanic activity that happened here, a lot of subterranean fires underneath the area. And that evidence can be seen on one of the salt mountains, which is located right over in the direction not far from where I'm standing. You can see the way that the mountain is moving. Instead of moving in this direction as normal mountains do, I'm talking about what I would call the grain of the rock, or the way the rock moves. It actually is going up and down, showing that either something pushed the mountain down or something pushed the mountain up and out, again indicating some kind of a cataclysmic activity that happened in the southern part of the sea, and that's the area where we're at right now, literally several miles from where ancient Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed centuries ago. Now, the reason that I have brought you here is not just to talk about the Dead Sea and the wealth of the Dead Sea, but I wanted to bring you here to talk about some of the references that are very interesting, some of the historical references about this area in Israel. The references I'm going to be sharing with you actually deal with subterranean fire and how there is fire underneath the area of the Dead Sea. For example, let's look at some of these scriptures together. In the 1st century, the geographer Strabo wrote, "It is a land of fires fueled by substances from the area." 100 years before Christ, a Jewish writer wrote, "Wisdom saved a man from destruction of the godless, and he escaped the fire that came down upon the 5 cities, whose wickedness is still attested by a smoking waste." Diodorus, the 1st century writer, wrote about the Dead Sea, "The fires burned beneath the ground, and the stench rendered the inhabitants of the neighboring country sickly and short-lived." Philo of the 1st century, speaking of Abraham, wrote, speaking again of the Dead Sea, "The fire is most difficult to extinguish and creeps on, pervading everything and smoldering. It is most evident proof of this is found in what is seen to this day. Smoke is still emitted, and the brimstone or sulfur which men dig up." In other words, he was saying that in his day, in the region of the Dead Sea, not only was there fire in that region, but he was saying that there was brimstone or sulfur that men were digging up. What does he have reference to here? Well, let's talk about the year 312. There was a writing which was in which some historians were talking about the Greek mercenaries in the year 312 here at the Dead Sea. Arabic tribesmen had rafts which were made out of reeds, and they would come here into the southern area of the Dead Sea waiting for something. What they were waiting for were these things called bulls. This is what they called them, bulls, and they were big pieces of black, sort of like asphalt and tar, that would suddenly surface from the bottom of the Dead Sea. And they would take men with rafts, and they would go out there into the area with 3 men on a raft, and they would wait till those big chunks would form on the water, and then they would take axes and chop those chunks up in pieces. Then they would bring them back to shore, where they would roll them in sand, put them in bags, and they would take them all the way down to Alexander, Egypt, where they would get a good price for them. And it's like jellied crude oil, so to speak. So it was something that people could use to burn. And this was in the year 312. And they tell me even to this day that from time to time on the Dead Sea, not only do you see the salt and the minerals and the potassium and the bromide, especially in the southern region, and you can see that here. This looks like an island here, but you can see the white part of this is some of the salt and the chemicals, over 21 different chemicals just in this part of the Dead Sea. And so this area, and my point is, and I don't want you to miss this, is this area is known for subterranean fires. Before 1887, and this was over well over 200 and some years ago, map makers showed a smoke coming off of the Dead Sea on the maps. Now, in the year 1787 AD, in the book Travelers, here's what it says. "South of Syria there is a hollow through which the Jordan flows in a country of volcanoes. The sulfurous sources of Lake Asphaltus, the lava pumice stones thrown upon its banks, and the hot baths of Tiberias demonstrate that this has been a seat of subterranean fire which is not extinguished. Clouds of smoke are often observed to issue from the lake, and new crevices form upon its banks." During a scientific investigation in 1848, there was a man by the name of Lynch who came to the Dead Sea area. This is what Lynch said, I quote, "A strong smell of sulfurated hydrogen gives off an odor in the night." And then we read where he wrote, "Men saw a haze with a purple tinge. It gave them the appearance of the smoke of burning sulfur." Now, in summing up this area of the Dead Sea, I don't want you to miss this point. Through history and through the Bible, it has been an area of tar, an area of sulfur, and by the way, the word brimstone, when you study it, has reference to sulfur. It has been an area of subterranean fires. It has been an area where